In the wake of the Joburg building fire, which has claimed at least 77 lives, the Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa, which has been criticized by numerous political parties, says the tragedy was a wake-up call for the leadership of the city of Johannesburg. Representatives from the Democratic Alliance, Patriotic Alliance, Economic Freedom Fighters, Congress of the People and Action SA have all accused NGOs of obstructing the city's attempts to eradicate the scourge of hijacked structures. Well, joining me now to respond to this is the Executive Director of the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, SERI, Nomzamo Zondo. Nomzamo, I appreciate your time this morning. Now, can you provide some context about the recent Joburg building fire and the tragic loss of lives it resulted in?
Thank you, Hugo. So SERI works representing unlawful occupiers. I think at this point, currently, we probably represent over 28 buildings of people who are threatened with eviction, which means that these are legal proceedings where the city is already a party, and all of our clients are asking the city to intervene by providing them with alternative accommodation. In over 20 years, the approach taken by the city in different administrations, from the administration of the ANC, of the DA, of the coalitions of late, those administrations' position has been, we shouldn't have to accommodate these people, but we will do it. We'll do it if a court pushes us. And when I mean a court pushes them, I mean that there have been multiple court applications forcing them to move people out of buildings that are sometimes unsafe into safer accommodation. Unfortunately, within the CBD, there's probably 6 buildings the city has provided as alternative accommodation. Almost all of them during the course of litigation, except one, which was another fire, where it was during COVID and there was a fire and the city provided the accommodation. Now, the reason the city is saying SERI has hampered their attempts to deal with hijacked buildings is because SERI has simply demanded that the city makes room for the poor in the inner city. And we're not saying they must make room for the poor by bringing people from outside into the inner city. We're saying the poor people who already live in the inner city must be provided with decent and affordable accommodation. This call we've made consistently in the last 10 years. And in making that call, we've also made suggestions about where the city could finance, how the city could finance those interventions, but also availed our own expertise. I myself am an attorney, but within our office, we work with people who are town planners, who are anthropologists, who are able to advise the city in terms of policy. And in fact, we've availed even our skills as attorneys in terms of engaging with communities, because one of the things that's also been a problem is that the city's focus has been on buildings. If you look at the different interventions that they've had a bed buildings project. They can tell you about buildings, but they can't tell you about people. And SERI, even this morning, and more so this morning, is demanding that the city must make sure poor people who live in the inner city have decent and safe accommodation. And we are saying that despite the fire. And one thing that's interesting, Hugo, that people do not know or have not really paid enough attention to, the building that burned down in the fire was a city-managed building. At least in 2014, where SERI's brief interaction with it happened, it was a city-managed building. We've heard that the city says between 2017 and 2018 it was leased to an NGO. That NGO gave the building back to the city. I was in a Twitter space where a DA councillor advised that in 2019, the building was going to be refurbished and was under the control of the Johannesburg Property Company. And I've also heard the city has said that in 2019, people unlawfully occupied that building. The one thing that's interesting about that is that...
Nomzamo, if you allow me to come in and just refer to a couple of bites, certainly from Colleen Makubela, who's a City of Joburg speaker, and Kenny Kunene, MMC for Transport, who speak to the issues that you allude to, and then we can pick up the conversation. Let's take a look.
No problem.
Certain NGOs that are hell-bent on preventing the city from dealing with it. It needs decisive action, and there will be casualties, but let there be no death. Let us have casualties of reallocating people to proper housing. But if we have to then succumb to the pressure because we are taken to court, there are court orders, we can't move, etc., and then something like this happens. So the city as well, the mayor will explain what they are doing about it because it falls in the executives. I know because it affects the citizens, it affects lives, and we are very, very saddened by what has happened today.
I want you to understand me very clearly. There's NGOs that are being paid on a retainer by those who hijack buildings, so that when we try to evict them, then they must take us to court on urgent interdicts, not to evict the people. This building, I understand, has been reported to the city. But when EMS come and they do an assessment and they say a building is unsafe and therefore people must be evicted, then you get an NGO like SERI that then takes you to court. Then you get other NGOs that I have been told by people who stay in these buildings who are tired of paying rental to criminals, saying that some of the NGOs that are taking you to court are actually on a retainer by these syndicates of criminals.
Nomzamo, those are damning allegations from Kenny Kunene and SERI obviously being taken to task. What is your response?
So I'm gonna respond up front, right, about allegations that SERI, and of course in his voice note he wants to say there's SERI and then there's NGOs who are collecting rent. Please, today, anyone who has evidence of SERI collecting rent, collecting money from any building, collecting a retainer, because SERI is a law clinic, has been certified as a law clinic by the Legal Practice Council on the basis that it takes absolutely no fees from anyone. So if people have evidence of SERI taking fees from anyone, please report us to the Legal Practice Council, and please, Hugo, invite them to Newzroom Afrika so that they can show the receipts. They can show who from SERI is taking this money, who let the people who give this evidence please come forward. I'm very interested to hear it, because at the point that I'm in, I lead an NGO that is reliant on the generosity of other people, that even at this point is not fully funded for this year, it only has a quarter of its funding for the following year. I would not have those worries if there were black plastic bags that were coming into our office. So please, I invite them, and I hope that this allegation will be aired completely. And I'm also pleading with the Legal Practice Council, when they get the complaint, please also publicize that complaint and the contents of that complaint, because this is just simply to sully SERI's name, when they know that as the city they have failed time and time again to play the role that they must play. I'm going to give you an example, Hugo. At any point, I think previously I was interviewed by Newzroom Afrika with MMC Ngcini Chwako. He mentioned a building that is represented by SERI. Fortunately for him, I am the person who accepted instructions from the residents of that building in 2013. In 2023, in fact, on the 6th of September, the city will be in court for failing to provide a report on where they will house the people in that building. It's litigation that's been going on for 10 years. In the course of that 10 years, there's at least six building audits where SERI and the city have gone into the building, knocked on door to door, and spoken to people, asked them, what is your income? Can you afford to house yourself? And in fact, even verify that information, and then had the city come back and say, these are the people in this group who cannot house themselves, and therefore we as the city must house them. That happened in Remington as recently as 2021. When the MMC, the very same MMC, went to Remington court with the police to kick people out of the building, SERI was called. We immediately came to the scene and we asked him, do you understand that we are part of a legal process about this building, part of a case for over 10 years about this building? And he said, look, I want to know who lives in this building. I want to audit them. And he said there was an audit in 2021. There was an audit in 2022. But if you want another audit, we are happy to do so. The very next day, a Sunday, my colleagues were outside Remington court. They waited for an hour for that very same MC to show up. He did not show up. They called him, and when he came alone to audit a 16-story building with over 160 households living in it. The stories that you're hearing for Colleen Makubel, let them show the receipts. What accommodation have they provided, where and for whom? The buildings that they presume to be unsafe in the inner city, why have they not acted? When did SERI stop them? I would also just give another reference. There was a building collapse in Davis Street in Doornfontein. Mr. Herman Mashaba was the mayor. When he was the mayor, again, he played the very same publicity stance, and he said, if it wasn't for SERI, this pool would have been moved. And we pointed out that the year before, the property owner who actually owns 5 buildings in the same precinct had made a suggestion that some of the people in the high-rise buildings would move into the building that actually had the wall collapse. And it took us 3 weeks for the city to find a place to house these people when the wall had already collapsed, when children already lost their lives. And then they only moved those people. Now, I think it's been about 3 years. And again, the people in the other 4 buildings are still there and have not been housed. The story the city of Joburg keeps giving is that they have nowhere to take them. And
now, Nomzamo,
unfortunately,
if you'll allow me to come in, just to shed further light. Now, the city of Johannesburg has a responsibility, certainly a constitutional responsibility when it comes to evictions and ensuring alternative accommodation for displaced individuals. Are you, SERI, being used as a scapegoat, do you think, certainly from some of these reports that we are getting, is the first part of the question. And the second part is, you speak of a number of court cases. You talked about one case that's been in the courts for 10 years. You've just mentioned a 3-year time frame. Now, surely for the benefit of the residents of the inner city, does it not make more sense for you to engage with the city of Joburg around a table and come to some agreement? Or have you already made attempts to do this?
We've been involved in multiple negotiations. The case that I referred to you to, in fact, we were ordered by a court, by Judge Makume, to engage on how we can make the building safe. And we made suggestions. Key to those suggestions, and I think that is a suggestion that applies across the inner city, is ensuring that there's basic services in all these buildings, that there is electricity, that there is water, that there is sanitation. If we look at the fire at 80 Albert Street, if I walked past that building, I would not have even imagined that it's unlawfully occupied. If I just looked at it before the fire, I would have assumed that there's a small-scale landlord who's running it, or that in fact it's the city-owned entity that's running it, if I just walked past the building. But we know there was a fire, and we know there was a fire because at some point the electricity in the building was disconnected, and people started using different sources of energy in the building. Of course, we don't know what the cause of the fire is, but I promise you that key to that would be people trying to use other sources of energy outside of electricity. Two, in just the impact and the number of fatalities that have occurred in this incident. We also know that there's an issue around people being able to escape the building, exit points. So that talks about fire escapes. It talks about whether the staircases are blocked or not, whether there's alternative escape routes in the building. Those are things that we've been continuously communicating to say the city has the resources and could make sure that some of these buildings, while it waits to find places to relocate people to, that these issues are dealt with. And even now, we've continued to, even in the last 5 days, even though we are on being attacked on Twitter, having to respond to these allegations in media platforms, we have continuously said SERI remains available to support the city. And we remain available to support the city in terms of figuring out what interventions are needed in relation to the community of 80 Albert Street. We are available to engage that happen again anywhere else. And just to close off, Hugo, and I'm sorry I'm being long, people don't understand the fact that in this building could have been a building that the city continued to manage. The city could have made this specific building available to house other people who are in unsafe conditions in 2018 and 2019, but they decided that it wasn't a building that could house the poor. And that is a position that continues, because even as we sit today, even we're going to figure out how to solve the problem that are empty in the CBD, that are not being used because they are heritage buildings.
Nomzamo, we seem to be struggling with certainly with your connection there, but I appreciate you making time to speak to us this morning. Nomzamo Zondo, SERI Executive Director, speaking to us this morning.